mixture of subjects in secondary school, from art subjects to calculus and physics, and enjoyed all of them. And careers advisors in the late 90s were like, oh, you should do architecture. And here we are. Seeing really cool examples of how this city might be occupied that were being built around the time we were at university, I think made me realise that individual architects can have this really positive impact on the city they live in and the way the urban space is occupied. It becomes a real exemplar for how you might use these sites better. And I think grappling with those challenges is really interesting.
Sally Ogle and Ben Mitchell-Anyon are the guiding lights of patchwork architecture based in Wellington. The two have an uncanny knack of designing and building houses in places few would even dream of. They also have a reputation for doing more for less in a stylish and sustainable way. Now that's something that deserves our attention. So I'm keen to find out how Sally and Ben, in a relatively short space of time, carved out a place amongst New Zealand's leading architects. I've asked Sally to take me to 3 favourite homes designed by other architects that have particularly inspired herself and Ben, as well as 3 of her own favourite patchwork builds. And we start in Wellington, where a group of first home buyers banded together to make entering the property market more affordable. Sally, I'm intrigued. An amazing site.
This is a co-housing project by Spacecraft Architects. A group of friends of ours, friends of the architects, who had been flatting, some of them together for quite a long time, and wanted to get houses, but obviously property market is a disaster, and realised that banding together to build individual houses and some communal space on what is an amazing site might give them some opportunities that they didn't otherwise have. It's essentially the same as any apartment building, except you're friends with your neighbours and you've got some communal space to have a party in.
Brilliant.
Co-housing has so many interesting facets to it. One being that there's no developer involved, so that developer margin's not part of the picture, and so they can take that and turn it into either cost savings or improving the quality of the final design. So this is the communal building. This is what separates this sort of co-housing project from a typical apartment building, in that this is a space that all of the occupants can use for dinner parties.
You could have a dinner party for 20 people in here if you wanted.
Yeah.
And you're away from the houses, so noise is not a big deal.
Mess
you know?
Somewhere else that's not in your house.
Yeah, really cool.
It's just an extension of their living rooms, which allows the individual houses to be a lot more efficient, a little bit more compact.
The materials, they're really effective at what they're trying to achieve.
It's really simple. We've got plywood floors, we've got really cost-effective Duralite cladding.
Does everything that you need it to do, but it doesn't cost you an arm and a leg.
Yeah, that's important, that we can make architecture that is super functional and really beautiful, but it doesn't have to be made up of expensive components.
Yeah, architecture becomes accessible to everybody.
I mean, that's the
Pretty
idea.
much. And then you've got the deck out here.
Some pretty amazing views out to the South Island on a good day.
Beautiful. You've got the north-facing sun on this side. It's cool. Happy days.
This is the southern side of the housing and opens onto the front doors of each house through these little covered front porch spaces, which in themselves extend the space of the apartments without having to build more costly interior space. This space is also quite sheltered from the southerly, sheltered from the northerly, so this is another space where they can all hang out on, you know, those less than amazing Wellington days.
Not being disrespectful to Wellington, but you do need to protect yourself from the wind. Although you're acclimatised, but I can feel it. But you can come in here and just sit out here, have your little cuppa. It's nice and sunny. There's no wind. It's a really cool area. And then you've got, I saw this before. This is funky.
These sliding windows open into the kitchen of each house. So
yeah.
you can see this is a place for the occupants to have a chat as they're going past each other's houses, but without sort of intruding into the interior space.
Excellent.
So come on inside. So we're coming in to the living level of these houses. The 4 houses are really similar plan-wise. We've got these private decks out on the northern side here, so this is a spot where you can be outside but completely private from the neighbours.
And I really like how they've used ply.
Yeah, it's nice to have the warmth of timber. We've got exposed concrete floors, so, you know, the structure is the finish in here. And we're also getting all of that northern sun onto these concrete floors, which heat up and do their passive solar thing.
Let's have a little wander downstairs. Oh, yeah. Oh, this is cool. Like, that's just really tranquil, quite idyllic.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like you're in the middle of the city.
No.
I think that's important to have these really tucked away private spaces that the occupants can retreat to. And it's really lovely to have bedrooms that open out with doors to outside, and I think that helps compact spaces feel larger, which is something, you know, we think about when we're designing quite a lot as well, is how do we make these quite compact, efficient plans feel more generous. We use a lot of similar materials, so macrocapa, exposed structure, not putting jib on the ceilings. It's another thing you don't have to pay for. Keeping it pretty simple, things that don't require heaps of repainting and maintenance.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. Sally, I can see why you brought me here. A very unique project.
I think this is an exemplar for what can happen on some of these sites in our cities, where one house can turn into 4 really great living spaces with a strong community around them, where they're not reliant on cars every time you need to go to the shops. That's important. These kind of projects, infill and increasing density in our, you know, relatively central city suburbs, are super important. About 40 to 50% of New Zealand's carbon emissions come from transport. Those emissions rise sort of exponentially the further you live from the city centre. So increasing the number of people who can live in these locations that are an easy cycle or on a bus route to the city, that's a massive part of helping us to reduce those carbon emissions as a country.
Makes total sense. But while Block Party is an innovative and practical response to the need for greater urban intensification, closer to central Wellington, there's an example of even more creative and lateral thinking. This time, Sally's patchwork partner, Ben Mitchell-Anyon, is joining us. In fact, they were both students at the Wellington School of Architecture and witnessed this next build going up. It's the second of Sally's favourite homes designed by other architects. Okay, guys, what are we actually looking at? Because the buildings are reasonably underwhelming.
They are, yep. But
Look up.
check out that one.
Okay, that's a bit different.
Yeah, so this is the Skybox by Gerald Melling, who Ben worked for a long time before we started Patchwork Architecture.
Gerald was amazing. The 3 years I worked for him, I pretty much learned everything I know about how to put a house together. He was really young at heart and generous with his time and his knowledge. So he worked down below and he was looking for somewhere to build himself a house and realised that he actually already had a spot for a house and it was directly above.
Gerald Melling died in 2012, but his skybox still sparks debate today, something he would surely be pleased about.
It isn't an extension of the building underneath it. It actually literally hovers over us so that the wind blows underneath. My bedroom's on the lower floor and I can hear the wind slap underneath me. And the point of this is, is to separate myself from the office underneath, like as much as I physically could. And the whole building sways like a boat in the wind. So its only connection is like an umbilical cord with staircase in it and underneath the belly of it. So when I go up there, I genuinely can say I lose the office. Because downstairs it's all chaos, all architectural daily chaos. Upstairs it's all kind of very pared back, quiet place to write.
Well, she's pretty tight. She's a squeeze.
Yeah. One of the really important things that I learnt while working at Mellingmorse was the 900 grid.
That's a little bit over my architect speak. What's the 900 grid?
900 millimetres.
900 millimetres, okay. Now we're getting somewhere.
Yeah. It's an imaginary grid on paper. When you're starting, drawing a house at 900, you might have 900 wide hallway, or a 900 wide stairway, or 1.8 metre wide bathroom, a 3.6 metre wide main room, and so on and so on. And if you can squeeze everything to a size that works but isn't too stingy, then you save overall.
So the 900, you've got enough room,
Yep.
but budget-wise, it's perfect.
For Gerald, it was, and I think probably a lot of architects would disagree, and they like
was
things
a bit tight, maybe?
like things to be a bit more generous.
That's what I said. I said coming up here was a little tight, but now that I know that it's 900 grid, I get it, right?
Yeah.
So
And it's
I'm happy
also,
with it.
it's a hallway, you're not living in the stairwell. It's about putting the space in the places that you use it the most.
Gerald Melling's skybox is stacked 3 stories high, with only a bedroom and some workspace on the first floor. But there's more living space the higher you go.
We're up in the kitchen.
Well, she's nice and light up here, isn't it?
You can see the 900 grid again, clearly in the structure of the windows and the ceiling battens. Right through the stairwell here.
I also see the use of macrocapa, isn't it?
Yeah.
That was another signature Mellingmorse thing, was that was basically the only timber they would use, macrocapa. That it was sustainable from New Zealand farm shelter belts, locally milled. You didn't need any chemical to preserve it. It was just not an option to use cedar that was imported all the way from Canada. From a sustainability point of view, that was one of the only timbers they could kind of justify using.
We use macrocapa in our work as well for the same reasons.
But it also does the trick as well. It's
beautiful.
It's a beautiful
Yeah.
wood. If it was sustainable and cheap and it looked ugly, I've got a funny feeling you wouldn't use it, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think this is a really interesting project in looking at how much space you actually need to live in. This has got a pretty small footprint, but you've got this outlook and sun and light, and it feels generous. Like, the bedrooms are actually really generous for the overall size of the house. Sure, the stairwells and the hallways are tighter, but thinking about where you need the space in a house and how people live is really important. That's something this project makes me think about.
We took a lot from Gerald. He was a really amazing architect. He wasn't only an architect, he was a writer, he was also a poet.
He's someone that's obviously affected you quite a lot.
Yeah. No, I miss him a lot. He was always happy to give it a crack, even if someone had a crazy site or not much money. I guess we're a bit the same.
Well, that's really nice. It makes architecture and architects accessible to everybody. Normally you think of architects and you think big budget. So it's actually really nice. That's your ethos, I reckon.
Good design shouldn't just be for rich people,
Exactly.
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How Gerald Melling managed to get council consent to build his skybox at all is probably worth a documentary in itself. But one thing's for sure, there were 2 young architecture students studying down the road who saw it being built and were greatly inspired.
Seeing the skybox go up, it was like basically a whole new residential style, to me at least, that using this leftover space above other buildings and actually occupying the city in a way that wasn't kind of soulless apartment buildings.
Wellington's been home to Sally Ogle for many years now, but her childhood was spent mucking in on the farm.
I grew up in the middle of nowhere, in the Wops, 1,000-acre farm in eastern Taranaki. As you can probably imagine, there's always something being built or fixed or made, and as a kid, you get dragged into all of those projects. So it's like, Sally, come here, you're learning to weld now because we've got to make this gate, or paint the yard railing, or we've decided to put in a tennis court and we're going to be concrete mixing for the next 24 hours. That's always been a part of life, I guess, for me.
That early practical experience fostered a can-do attitude that served Sally well. On graduating from architecture school with Ben, they teamed up with 2 friends, Caroline Robinson and Tim Gettos, and found a steep, cheap section in Whanganui, a steal at $18,000. Then with lots of ambition and energy, and maybe not much else, they started building.
We didn't know what we were doing at the start. I mean, like probably between the four of us, we could have cobbled together a fence or a deck in a moderately competent fashion. We knew that we could work hard, and also there wasn't really any scenario where we got halfway through and gave up, because then you'd just have this half-finished house. So we just had to figure it out.
They named their project Dogbox, partly in homage to Skybox by Gerald Melling. They literally learnt on the job, and those lessons ended up having a profound effect on their subsequent architectural careers.
It's actually incredibly easy to draw things that you cannot build. You can draw completely compliant, really beautiful details that there is no way you could physically construct. And learning how to build on that project was a pretty good shortcut to realising that.
Once Dogbox was completed, for the princely sum of about $160,000, excluding their own labour, it started making waves. In 2013, it was a finalist in the New Zealand Home of the Year Award, up against much more expensive builds from some big names in the architectural world. It didn't win, but that hardly mattered. These youngsters had arrived.
That was obviously pretty gratifying for us. That felt like a good starting point to go and do our own thing. And we never went back to working for anyone else.
Sally and Ben's next project was in Wellington, on a site no one else apparently could see the potential of. The result was Stealth Bomber, an ambitious design that put patchwork on a lot of people's radar.
The section had been on the market for quite a while, partly because it was surrounded by 4 neighbours, but also because it was steep and covered in trees and really hard to see the potential in it. But despite the steep contour, we all looked at it and thought, yep, we can do something good here. First thing we did was get a digger to come and see if we could fit a digger between these 2 garages, because that was kind of make or break for being able to build something.
Satisfied that they could at least get materials up to the site, Sally and Ben set to work using their Dogbox experience to keep a close eye on the budget.
We had builders on a labour-only contract, and we project managed it all, and we carried everything up the hill so that we weren't paying builders $65 an hour to carry sticks up a hill.
The difficulties of building here ended up working in Ben and Sally's favour. They were forced to think right outside the box, literally.
The form of this house was dictated largely by the site constraints. What we decided to do after several iterations was get the building as high up the hill as we could, and then wrap it like a boomerang.
Following the angle of the boundaries.
We could have more height in the middle, top corner of the site, but as we fell down the site, the building had to follow those height to boundary rules.
Another challenge was creating usable outdoor living space.
On these steep sites, you're not going to end up with a flat lawn. So creating outdoor spaces as an extension of the house, which also lets the house be maybe a little bit smaller if it can spill out onto larger spaces.
The decking surrounding Stealth Bomber and the extra living space it offers is even more important when you consider the floor space of the house itself.
This house is 1 room wide and never gets any wider than 3.5 metres at any point in the building. And there's lots of architectural moves to try and make that feel a lot more generous than the floor plan size would suggest. We've got volume, obviously, open plan space that's broken up with changes in level, changes in volume, changes in the material of the flooring.
And there's a lovely feeling of space having this generosity in the length through here. And these doors are overall sliders, so they can slide right back over the cladding, and you get a 3.5 metre wide clear opening. And on those rare Wellington days when there's no wind, you can have both sides completely open, and it feels amazing.
With their hard-won experience building Dogbox, Ben and Sally, joined by Sally's husband Chris, took over Stealth Bomber once the builders had made it watertight. By this stage, Sally had decided this could well be her family home.
Me and Chris and Sally took over a year of weekends to finish the house. And that was all of the flooring, the ceilings, the kitchen, the bathroom, the decking, the stairs up, and installing these large recycled Oregon beams.
The material palette in this house is pretty simple. It's black colour steel on the outside, jib and macrocapa used in lots of different places. Macrocapa is something we use in a lot of our projects because it doesn't need any finishing. None of this has anything on it. It's just going to silver off over time, and inside it is just, wearing really nicely as we walk on it. We got all the marble that you'll see all around the house out of a commercial building that was being demolished. It was just going to end up in a skip bin. So we were able to take about 2 tons of green marble.
Apart from being lovely, these recycled and found materials, the point of it was to save money and that we didn't have to make every decision about the house on a piece of paper. We could take our time over a year and say, oh, look, we found this, where can we use that?
Moving from the public spaces into the more private part of the house, there are 3 bedrooms, plus a little hidden extra.
In this part of the house, they've dropped the ceiling to about 2 metres, which allows for us to sneak in a bunk room by compressing the ceiling above the bathroom. And because either side of that compressed area, you're in quite a lofty volume, it still feels generous and spacious rather than tight and compressed.
It's just such a great overflow space for guests crashing or children playing. It's a real bonus for this house, and it didn't really cost any more money. We tend to give generosity to spaces that we use more. Having a slightly smaller bathroom, if that means you can have a bigger living area where you spend a lot more time, then we'll always go for that.
I've spent huge amounts of time here over the last 4 years and never get sick of being at home. It's a surprising house that has a lot of variety of spaces which are really lovely to live in.
This project was about making the most of a site with a whole lot of constraints. Payoff is often they're more private, they've got better views. Being in the trees is just a really lovely feeling for a house which is actually quite close to town. I think we accomplished a lot, and there were hard points in the process of building this house, but we're still friends.
Yeah.
Sally Ogle has brought me out of Wellington and north to Peka on the Kapiti coast to show me the final of her favourite New Zealand homes designed by other architects.
We're just seeing it kind of nestled into the dunes here. It's a pretty simple, very clean box, kind of tucked in.
Macrocapa again, your favourite wood.
Love it.
It's gone that silvery grey colour, it looks lovely.
Yeah, and this is a pretty harsh environment. We're right on the coast. Because we're into a courtyard house here.
This is cool, isn't it? I love the olive trees.
Andrew, both the architect and lives here, describes the sort of form of the house with the courtyard as creating some defended territory in what is a pretty harsh coastal environment.
Well, it makes sense because the sea's there, obviously. You've got
Sea's
the
right
wind
there.
blasting through there. I guess it's like a concrete bunker, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think this space in some ways allows that sort of wild dune landscape to come right up to the edge of the perimeter of the house, and then this is a more domesticated landscape. I think it's an interesting space. A lot of courtyard houses turn towards the courtyard and it's sort of the focal point of the house, but in this house, I think it functions more as a sort of an in-between space.
And that's particularly important in this home because there are 3 generations living alongside each other.
Andrew and Julianne, his wife, live here along with their children, but Julianne's parents also live here in a separate unit.
Seems to be a running theme with you, that generational thing with the families living together.
Yeah.
It shows it can work.
I think that kind of co-housing in whatever variant, like family or friends, is a really interesting way of living that works really well.
Especially now, everything's just so expensive and And as long as you can have your space, because it's not everybody's cup of tea to be living with their in-laws or their friends, but as long as you've got your little pockets and it's intimate.
I think that is what makes it an interesting design challenge, because those issues of privacy can be solved with good design. You don't have to feel like you're living on top of each other.
Exactly. It looks very, very interesting. I'd like to get inside and have a little glimpse. And you architects, you all tend to build like really quite minimalist, eh? Like concrete, glass, steel.
I mean, I'm interested in the way materials go together and creating amazing spaces using a limited material palette. So thinking about the detailing. This house has got some really sophisticated detailing.
After you. You certainly get an eyeful, don't you?
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing view out there.
You know what I like about it? It feels like you're living in the dunes.
Yeah, I think this house feels like it's carved into or out of the dunes in a lot of ways. We've got this concrete base to the whole thing, which changes levels. And it feels like that's holding it all down to the dunes.
I like it. It feels lived in,
Yeah.
but really sleek and clean.
I love this house. It's got a real sense of volume, and I think it's interesting to achieve that in a house that actually has a flat ceiling. So the volume is being created by the floor being lowered and raised in different places.
Really like the kitchen. Even the finishing, everything that seems to be quite exact.
Something you mentioned before is that us architects like to use a minimal material palette. And I think that those junctions that you see in this house where one thing just seamlessly runs into another are actually so hard to achieve. Andrew's done such a beautiful job of those really clean transitions here, where the windows go seamlessly past the ceiling and you get that sort of feeling of volume in the space, and then you get that really clean line when you're looking at it from the exterior where the windows go right up to the roof. The ceiling is a flat plane, but the floor level keeps changing. So as we get down here, it's the hearth for the fire and a window seat looking out to the view.
It's quite cosy, isn't it? A sunken down lounge.
It's nice to have these sort of cozier spaces in larger houses. This is a reasonably spacious house overall, but it's broken up into lots of intimate nooks and smaller rooms, which make it feel really livable. For me, that's kind of what architecture is all about, is about creating spaces that feel really good for the people that live in them.
Yes. One thing I really admire about the Peka Peka house is the architect and owner, Andrew Sexton, resisted the urge to level the dunes to create one flat site. Instead, he varied the floor levels to create different spaces, from the home office to the steps and the ramps in the courtyard and to this lounge.
So this wing of the house is the bedrooms and bathrooms.
And then what have we got through here? They've got, oh, then it opens out into another really nice space.
These kind of spaces mean that you don't need a second living space. You could imagine the kids playing in this spot whilst, you know, adults are in the lounge. That's going to work.
Yeah, absolutely.
And kind of similar to some of the other places we've seen on this tour, the space is in the bits of the house where you use it. So the bedrooms themselves are actually pretty compact. Where you've got spaces is in the living rooms and these sort of spaces that are a bit more multi-purpose.
I can see why Sally has brought me here. There's restraint, simplicity, and elegance to the design, which is reminiscent of Patchwork's own work. This house, I can tell by just walking around it with you, you're sort of glowing. You really like this place.
I really like this house. I think it's a great house. It's got beautiful detailing. This is a hard environment to be designing in. That's super interesting as a design problem.
I think it's fantastic. Magnificent job. The Stealth Bomber house got a lot of attention in Wellington, and Patchwork got a huge boost in profile. But that didn't mean Sally and Ben were now on Easy Street. Oh no. After Stealth Bomber, the builder they used asked him to design his own home. Sounds great, right? That was until they saw the site.
They found this tiny, south-facing triangular cliff. We came and had a look and did a bit of due diligence and thought, yeah, actually there's some possibilities on this site.
Understanding the constraints was really important, like knowing what the problems were going to be. Obviously, quite steep, triangles always a bit difficult to work with, and a really busy road, but it comes with opportunities as well. The opportunities that were really reserved to one side, road to the other side, and then a neighbour to the north, which was a bit higher. It meant that we could really push the envelope of height to the road and to the reserve. And we knew from clambering up here that if we could get up high enough, we'd have really good views over Lyell Bay.
Despite their initial optimism, it was clear this cliff would not be conquered easily. But planning to build up to get the view was a critical early decision because that influenced the design and the use of the site.
One thing we were really conscious about was not digging into the ground if we didn't have to. So not spending like loads and loads of money on foundations, which you don't get to enjoy and live in.
The concept was basically to build a pole house, but with a very clever twist. Ben and Sally borrowed a technique often seen in commercial construction, a solid concrete core that braces the whole building, allowing the poles themselves to be quite slender. It also provided a nice little area under the house.
On a site like this, to have these covered outdoor spaces, kind of carving out on what was a really steep site, these little usable flat bits. So on this level, a little bit of grass and deck, and then you'll see as we go up, more and more deck.
The concrete core not only braces the house, it also cleverly allows entry up through its centre.
So we pop up from the core right into the middle of the plan. And this house is called the 10 by 10 for a very simple reason that it's exactly 10 metres by 10 metres, perfect square.
And because this is a house for a builder, he was also really interested in that super rational construction because it helps at that end of the process as well. You know, every piece of cladding is the same as the next piece. And so Ben will often start planning things with that amount of rigour and sometimes end up massaging that a little bit before you get to the end of the process. But this house, it stayed that rigorous the whole way through.
Architects often talk about rigour and purpose when discussing design, and the 10 by 10 house is a great example. It's only 100 square metres on one level, but there are 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, the kitchen and dining, and lots of spacious living. Plus some other nifty design features as well.
The thing we experimented with on this house was dropping the windows, the glazing, below the floor and then above the ceiling. And apart from being quite a beautiful effect in here, floor kind of floating up to the glass, it means there's actually less junctions and less bits and pieces on the outside of the building, so it gives it this really sort of crisp line on the exterior.
I think one of the things that we think is really successful about this house that we're really happy with is the way that we're able to carve out exterior spaces, really usable ones that extend the floor area of the interior.
There's certainly some clever indoor-outdoor flow at work here, but Ben and Sally went one step further and built something on top that really capped things off.
The roof deck is a bit of a folly, and it's
In Wellington.
In Wellington, but it is really amazing up here on a good day. We also built this little shelter that we like to call the bus stop, which can house, you know, a barbecue. It's got a sink. But the main thought behind that was for putting in outdoor furniture because we were worried that it would actually end up on the road in a good northerly. It's always great bringing someone up here and taking them over the edge and, you know, have the sort of look over and realise that you're 14 metres above the ground or something.
I'm scared of heights, so it makes it feel quite safe to have the balustrade pulled back from the edge. This is a house that we're really proud of. Adam and Alicia were really trusting clients, and I think that allowed us to push pretty hard on a really difficult site to get a really great outcome.
The 10 by 10 house was another award winner for patchwork architecture, but it was also a pivotal project for Sally. It helped her redefine and expand her role in the company and how she worked with Ben.
I think we have a really great working partnership where our skills are really complementary. He's a really amazing designer. He's really strong at those big ideas. I also do plenty of design work, but I've come to realise that some of my strengths are in getting the projects through the process. 10 by 10 is a really good example. Ben had this really clear, strong idea about doing something that's up out of the ground to avoid tons of groundworks, and that's a really strong design approach to that site, but it's also a hugely non-compliant approach to that site. And so there was a lot of work with the council and compliance and resource consenting side of that project to be able to take that clear idea and actually get it to a point where we could go forward with it into a building.
Patchwork architecture principals Sally Ogle and Ben Mitchell-Anyon both live in houses they've worked on together. Sally in Stealth Bomber in Wellington and Ben in their first ever build, the Dog Box in Whanganui. Despite living in different cities, they continue to collaborate closely.
What are you working on?
I've been looking at the Arrow Street site.
And share the same philosophies, especially about the future of the New Zealand house.
We work on a lot of very budget-driven projects, and so the approach we take to sustainability and environmental issues is often a reductive one rather than additive. So we're not adding in features, for example, like photovoltaics that would generate their own energy. So those just simply don't make the budget cut for our projects. But what we can do is build a house that's half the size, and that's going to use less energy over its lifetime.
Now, we've seen that philosophy at work on patchwork projects on tight, difficult urban sites like the 10 by 10 house. But this wide, open rural site is another story altogether.
Unusually for patchwork architecture, just a flat paddock as a starting point.
I'm intrigued. The location is so different for Sally and Ben, but it sounds like this was a challenge they felt compelled to take on.
It was about zooming out and looking at the wider site analysis. You know, where's the sun, where's the views, where's the prevailing wind? How do you do a house in a paddock?
Yeah, well, I tell you what, you've done an extremely good job. This is really cool. It looks like a full-on concrete block that runs around the whole place, but it allows the paddock to come right up almost inside, but it's a...
Yeah, it's a nice delineation to the domesticated part of the house. I grew up in the country, and one of my kind of pet peeves is there's houses and then you have this strip of lawn and then this funny fence. So this path allows the paddock to come right up to this house, and it just feels really comfortable in the wider landscape. Come on in.
Really intriguing structure, isn't it? Look at that. Oh, I love an outside bath, but it's an outside shower as well.
It was a chance to do something really lovely.
It's so cool and it's so private. There's this massive landscape. It's quite hard to fathom how big it is, isn't it? Like, it's huge, right? And yet you feel really private.
Yeah, obviously that was a pretty big consideration with the orientation of the house, and the way that that works is those long views, but also that privacy. These are very much like extra rooms that expand the living spaces.
Here's the macro carpet again, which I love.
Yep. In this case, the mac is just from a mill, I don't know, probably about 20 k's up the road, so super local.
I love the way you leave everything exposed, so you can see that the rafters, the nuts and the bolts, nothing's been closed in.
If the structure can be the finished product, then that's a, it's a whole layer of less stuff that you're having to do or pay for.
Yeah.
Stripping it back to what it needs to be.
Oh, yeah. That is really beautiful.
The finish is similar to outside, quite simple, concrete floors throughout, jib everywhere.
Oh, I tell you what, I love this wall. Isn't that beautiful? There's a little door here that pops open like that.
So this is a really special part of this house. This can actually move, the whole wall can move.
Look at that. Oh, now that is really, really sexy, eh? Like, and how easy that moves, and it's a giant wall, and you've just moved the wall out of the house.
Yeah.
Holy.
So on the other side of that wall is their workspace, or it can become another bedroom, or it can just expand the living space.
It was quite not a small space, it was still quite a big space, but it felt closed off.
Yep, it makes it more
Almost.
flexible.
Oh, I really love it.
This door is also something that's really important to our clients. So the Potama pattern, the stairway to heaven pattern, is something that reminds our clients of people they've lost who they'll eventually be reunited with.
Sally, that's so nice.
It's a grey window. The bench runs right into the glass, and as does the cabinetry on either side. So the frame just disappears and it's just the view.
And that there is like, oh, I like that.
Yeah, so this, I guess, is a sort of a window seat piece of joinery at the end here.
Oh, that's so you can actually get a suntan in here.
The overall effect of all these big windows is a feeling of space far bigger than the 128 square metre footprint of the house. But the windows are not the only hallmarks of patchwork style at play here.
This is something we think about in a lot of our houses, is extending the floor with these outdoor rooms. So this is the western side of the house. So afternoon sun, the northwesterly is often the prevailing wind in the Wairarapa. So having these spaces on both sides of the house means there's always somewhere outside you can be.
Sally, there's heaps of things I love about this house, but one of them is this really interesting space, the triangular space.
Yes. This house is actually a sort of a simple gable roof form with the ridge line running down the centre of the house. And then sort of clip the edge of that gable roof off on this angle. So what you get is these triangular patio spaces. So it's quite a simple move on quite a simple form, but it creates these really interesting spaces as a result. This house opens directly to outside from almost every room in the house. It gets really hot in the Wairarapa, so having that natural ventilation, those are really important considerations in the design.
This place makes me feel really good. How does it make you feel?
It's great to come and see this house again. I really love the way this house sits in the landscape. It's quite a simple and strong form, so it doesn't feel overwhelmed in this big, big landscape.
Absolutely, and the way that the materials that you've used as well, those sort of materials that you associate with farmland.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about materials that sit appropriately in a kind of rural setting, but it's not a barn, it's a house, so you want it to feel a bit more refined and special. I guess it's sort of a slick shed.
Really love it.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
In my book, Sally and Ben from Patchwork have earned respect. They've fought for every square metre of success. I think they offer hope to people facing huge challenges in the housing market. And they're pulling more than their weight when it comes to sustainable architecture.
Sally, I just wanted to say thanks for showing me what really good architecture looks like. I really love what you and Ben are doing. You're bringing great design, innovative design, but it's not costing an arm and a leg, so it's accessible for most of us. So it allows most people to dream that those things are possible. And that's a big to you.
Thanks, Matthew. Thanks for letting us drag you around some buildings that we think are cool.
Oh, I wouldn't say drag. I enjoyed every moment of it.